This image should not have been noticed at all. Sol 847 of the Perseverance mission. Another day in Jezero Crater. The rover took a standard panorama. Mastcam slowly panned from left to right. Hundreds of frames were queued for transmission. The night shift engineers tagged the package, checked the telemetry, and sent it down the communication channel. Routine. 12 hours later, one frame made the junior image analyst freeze. In the upper right quadrant, about halfway up the crater wall, something reflected the sunlight. A hard, sharp glare, not the diffused glow of dust or the muted reflection of weathered rock. A flash, like polished metal under a spotlight. The analyst enlarged the image and increased the contrast. And there it was, a geometric object embedded in the slope. It shouldn't be there. Rectangular, with one corner buried in regolith. Two sides are visible, both perfectly flat within the pixel grid. The edges are straight, the angles too close to 90 degrees for it to be a natural rock. The height of the object is about 30, maximum 40 centimeters, about the size of a briefcase. The surface is smooth enough to reflect a bright sun glare into the camera even through the dusty atmosphere of Mars. Perseverance had been photographing split boulders, layered cliffs, and rounded pebbles for years. Nothing in the descending data stream resembled this. He checked the metadata. Mastcam Z, right eye, focal length, 1800 millimeters. The timestamp matched the motion log. No cosmic ray bursts were recorded, no compression errors. The glare appeared in 3 consecutive frames as the rover passed by. Parallax confirmed that it was a stationary object on the ground, not a glare moving with the optics. He opened the navigation camera images for the same time period. Low resolution, black and white image, grain. But in the right section of the horizon, a dark rectangle broke the line of the profile. Same place, same proportions. The navigation cameras had also seen it. The first thought was obvious. Debris. Perseverance did not land alone. The descent module, heat shield, and rear cover crashed a few kilometers away. Ingenuity left its equipment behind. Perhaps some shiny fragment had flown farther than expected. But when he superimposed the map of the known debris field, nothing matched. None of the documented components were even close to these coordinates. The object lay far beyond the calculated dispersion zones. He sounded the alarm. An hour later, the small room at JPL was already full of people. Mission managers, imaging specialists, geologists. One person from the public relations department, whose face betrayed a sense of foreboding. The frame from Sol 847 was displayed on a large screen. A flash of light. Someone dimmed the lights. A rock, the geologist said automatically. Split basalt. We've seen strange geometric shapes before. The imaging specialist shook his head. Run the boundary detector. They did so. The algorithm traced clear lines around the object. The 2 visible sides were almost identical. The shadow spoke volumes. A dense rectangular silhouette, sharply contrasting with the chaotic shadows of the surrounding rubble. No uneven chips, no rounded corners. Even the upper edge of the shadow was smooth. A shiny stone, the geologist repeated more weakly. Look at the glare, said the analyst. It's a reflection. Stones scatter light. And this is a mirror reflection, like stainless steel or chrome. A voice came from behind. Zoom out. The full context appeared. The object lay on a gentle slope, partially buried in the ground, surrounded by ordinary Jezerovo regolith. No traces, no disturbed soil. It seemed to have been lying there for a long time, certainly not since yesterday's fall. The room instantly divided along instinctive lines. The engineers saw possible contamination, an unknown detail potentially related to the equipment that they could not account for. A safety risk, if it was part of the rover itself. The scientists saw something else, an anomaly that was difficult to describe in words that would stand up to public scrutiny. The PR department saw it as a nightmare. They ran through all the engineering logs. No unexplained mass loss, no missing covers or brackets. The rover's self-diagnostics did not reveal any disconnected elements. The entry, descent, and landing equipment was selected from orbital images, and no fragment matched the geometry of the rectangle on the crater wall. Someone finally said aloud what was hanging in the air. If it's not ours and it's not a rock, then whose is it? There was no answer. The standard procedure suggested itself. Mark the coordinates as a high-priority target, plan a deviation from the route, and get closer. hit the object with the supercam laser, measure the plasma spectrum, scan it with spectrometers, take close-ups. If it's just a strange rock, they'll find out. If it's something else, even more so. But that's not what happened. Within 4 hours, the plan for the next week's movements was rewritten. Perseverance's route was diverted away from the anomalous slope. The next waypoints were moved in the opposite direction, deeper into the ancient delta. Officially, the correction was explained as optimization of the scientific program. Unofficially, there was not a single person in the room willing to let the rover approach the object until much higher-ups gave the go-ahead. The analyst who first noticed the glint saw the updated route and turned to his boss. "Aren't we going to study it?" "Not now." "When then?" Pause. "Most likely, never." Perseverance's raw images are published almost without delay. This is one of the mission's gimmicks. Anyone with internet access can see the dust devils, rocks, and tracks left by the rover. Before being uploaded to the servers, the images are not manually moderated. There is too much data and too few people, with rare exceptions. The frame from Sol 847 did appear in the open archive for exactly 19 minutes. That was enough time for a few enthusiasts and scraping bots to download it. One user posted a cropped fragment on a small forum with the caption, "What the hell is this?" 19 minutes after the download, the official record in the archive changed. The original high-resolution file started to give an error. In its place appeared a recompressed version of the same frame with the same timestamp, but without the glare. The slope where the object lay became flat. Cloned pixels. Someone had clearly used a retouching tool, and badly. In conspiracy subreddits and on space Twitter, before-after comparisons flared up. NASA edits Mars photo removing artifact. Repeating noise patterns were visible in the edited area. Traces of rough interference. Nothing happened publicly. No press releases, denials, admissions of the anomalies' existence, or editing. But another conversation began on several secure channels. Because this was not the first anomaly. A few months earlier, when 3I Atlas was passing near Mars, orbital vehicles recorded strange phenomena over the Jezero region. Small local magnetic fluctuations, short-term heat spots near the surface. At the time, the data was classified as interesting but inconclusive and sent to the archives. Now, when a geometric reflector flashed on a slope where only sedimentary rocks were supposed to be, the coincidence no longer seemed accidental. People who had been monitoring the anomalies of the interstellar comet saw a pattern. 3I Atlas with its impossible acceleration and industrial metal spectra. 3I Atlas, whose gas jets suspiciously coincided in time with Mars and Europa at key moments. 3I Atlas, whose dust left organic traces in the upper layers of the Martian atmosphere before the object disappeared into the system. What if one fragment didn't just fly by? What if something was dropped? Not a huge probe, nothing dramatic. A seed. A small armored container designed to withstand atmospheric entry, ricochet, several flips, and get stuck in an ancient lake crater. A location chosen for its geology, potential habitability, and proximity to the only nuclear laboratory on wheels that humanity has ever sent to another planet. If you wanted to leave a message that the locals would find sooner or later, Jezero Crater with Perseverance roaming around it would be the obvious choice. Except that someone up there didn't seem to want the locals to see that message. A quiet working group was formed, unofficial, late-night calls between a handful of scientists from JPL, ESA, and a university in Israel, where Avi Loeb continued to annoy his colleagues by calling asteroids potential artifacts. They pulled out every frame before and after 847. They tweaked the levels and studied the shadows. The object was visible in only 3 images. The angle and distance did not allow them to see any details. No engravings, no seams, only polished, featureless planes and that impossible shine. The team took a risk. They ran the image through an algorithm once created to restore details in blurry surveillance camera footage. The model drew a plausible high-frequency structure based on training data from millions of photos. Not proof, a hypothesis. The enhanced image revealed a frightening detail. Along the upper edge of the visible face, just below the rim, ran a thin groove. Not noise, but a groove running almost the entire width and ending at the buried corner. It looked like a slot, like a crack where something is inserted. A card, a key, a sensor probe. On Earth, this would have been dismissed as pareidolia. But on Mars and Jezero, after the flyby of an interstellar object, nothing could be dismissed so easily anymore. The team drafted an internal memo, cautious, without unnecessary speculation, just the facts. A highly reflective, straight-edged object was recorded on Sol 847. Its geometry does not correspond to known types of Martian rock. It is not a documented component of any Earth equipment on Mars. The rover's route after the discovery deliberately takes Perseverance away from potential investigation. Conclusion: it is strongly recommended that spectroscopy and close-up photography be performed at the first safe opportunity. There was no official response to the memorandum. Instead, the three signatories suddenly found their access to the rover's planning tools restricted. One was transferred to a near-Earth observation mission. Another decided it was time for academic leave. Meanwhile, the story of the edited photo was gaining momentum on the internet. People who knew nothing about 3i Atlas became convinced that NASA had found alien technology and was hiding it. Most mainstream scientists dismissed it as compression artifacts, dust, or paranoia. But the coincidence did not go unnoticed by those who saw the bigger picture, because when the rover demonstratively drove away from the shiny rectangle, something else happened that no one was willing to talk about publicly. The SeisMars network, a set of seismometers and atmospheric sensors from various missions, recorded faint vibrations, deep, local. Their epicenter was not under the object, but under the rover's new route, as if something under the bottom of the crater was being rebuilt, or waking up. What Perseverance captured on the distant slope might not have been a message, but a clue, a marker pointing to something much bigger, buried deeper. And every meter the rover moved away from this place did not make the situation safer. It only increased the uncertainty. If it really was related to 3i Atlas, if a fragment of an interstellar visitor had passed through the thin Martian atmosphere and landed in Jezero, then the polished block was not a single curious find. It was a visible element of a still functioning system. The question remained, was anyone on Earth willing to risk touching it? Or would humanity once again prefer to turn away and pretend that there had never been any shine? The decision was made 12 days after the leak of Sol 847. Not officially by NASA, by someone who had the authority to quietly reprogram the rover. The planning logs for Sol 863 showed the usual route, but in the command stream, hidden among the service packets, a small deviation was discovered, one waypoint outside the planned trajectory, backward to the place of the glare. When the analyst who first noticed the anomaly saw the telemetry, he almost cried out, but he held back. If this was an independent action, he would be fired instantly for making it public. If the sanction came from a level he couldn't reach, he would be fired for gossiping even more. In any case, silence seemed safer. He watched as the rover's coordinates were updated in real time. Perseverance crawled forward at its maximum speed, 30 meters per hour on flat ground, less on slopes. The target was about 300 meters away. At least 10 hours of travel, 10 hours of movement toward what the command had so diligently steered him away from 2 weeks ago. Someone wanted answers so badly that they put their career on the line, perhaps even their freedom. After 3 sols, the rover stopped 60 meters from the object. From that distance, the mast cam zoom could show details that had previously been invisible. New images arrived in the nightly downlink. This time, they were marked as restricted before they reached the general archive, but copies were already circulating on internal networks. The object was not a rock. High-resolution images revealed its texture, or rather its lack thereof. The surface was smooth to the limit of the optic's resolution. No graininess, no crystalline edges, no microcraters. On Mars, exposed surfaces become weathered. Dust polishes them. Wind smooths them. This thing looked brand new. The edges were razor sharp. The measured angles were exactly 90 degrees, accurate to 1/10 of a pixel. The groove along the upper edge turned out to be real. The SuperCam laser rangefinder gave a depth of 4 millimeters and a length of 12 centimeters, a perfect straight line. The glare up close was even stranger. It didn't play like metal. It was stable, like a mirror, like polished glass. But glass on Mars quickly becomes cloudy under ultraviolet light and abrasive dust. Nothing stays that shiny for years, unless it hasn't been lying there for years, unless it appeared very recently. An unofficial group performed thermal calculations. If the object fell during the 3-Eye Atlas flyby of Mars, the overheating upon entry would have been tremendous, but the fragments could have flown relatively slowly relative to the planet for aerodynamic braking to work. A dense, heat-resistant shell would have withstood it if it had been specially designed, especially with its small size. Calculations showed that the final impact speed could have been about 50 meters per second, enough to penetrate without breaking apart, enough to raise dust that would settle in a few hours. By the time Perseverance arrived, the surface would already look untouched. Only the object itself would reveal its recent arrival. The timeline matched. The physics matched. Only one thing didn't match: the official version according to which nothing special had happened. Then the rover received a command that no one expected: deploy the manipulator. The robotic arm extended, the drives hummed. The Watson camera turned for inspection, the mast moved into position. At full extension, Perseverance could touch the object, take a sample, grind away the surface layer with an abrasive tool, and take microscopic images. Someone at the top clearly wanted proof. The arm reached forward. 3 minutes to contact. 2, 1. The transmission broke off. All telemetry from Perseverance disappeared right in the middle of the session. No warning, no error codes, just silence. Tracking stations waited for the signal to return. Normal communication failures last seconds. This one lasted minutes, then an hour. Engineers panicked. They sent commands. No confirmation came. Either the rover had malfunctioned, or it had gone into safe mode, or someone had deliberately cut the channel. 3 hours later, communication was restored, but the rover was already in a different place. There was a gaping hole in the coordinate log. The continuity of the trajectory had been disrupted. One moment, it was standing 60 meters from its target with its arm outstretched. The next, it was already 400 meters away, moving in a completely different direction and, judging by the timestamp, at a speed many times greater than its technical limit. The arm was folded and retracted. It was clean, no dust or traces of contact. The camera was looking forward, and the navigation images showed flat, empty terrain. No anomalous objects. Analysis of the flight logs revealed that the data for those 3 hours had been corrupted, not by radiation or a software glitch. It had been erased by a cleanup command. Intentionally. The official wording was as follows: temporary communication anomaly, equipment restarted, all systems normal, mission continues. But unofficially, 2 facts were indisputable. First, something interfered at the moment when Perseverance attempted to touch the object. Second, something physically moved the rover across terrain that it could not have traversed in that time with its own motors. The working group went deep underground. They gathered everything: the glare, the geometry, the mirrored surface, the impossible smoothness, the edited public image, the route change, the illegal turn, the communication failure, the mysterious jump. They compared it with data from 3-Eye Atlas. Flight dates, dust trails, magnetic anomalies, seismic pulses recorded by InSight before its death, signal time from Europe, and modulations of Jupiter's polar auroras. The picture was coming together. 3-Eye Atlas didn't just peek into the solar system, it left a network behind. Small nodes, cargo capsules distributed across several worlds where conditions are optimal for a developing civilization to discover them. Mars, with its thin atmosphere and wheeled laboratories. Europa, with its ocean beneath the ice and orbital observers. Perhaps Earth's orbit also received its gift, hidden among the debris of satellites and space junk. Each node was passive until approached, or until activated by a specific signal. When Perseverance got too close, whatever was lurking beneath the bottom of Jezero awoke. It protected the node. It removed the threat. It erased the traces. Not hostile, protective, like an alarm, or a quarantine protocol. One of the group members, a retired mission planner who had nothing left to lose, decided that enough was enough. He published everything at once. He posted an uncensored frame of Sol 847 on a dozen sites with metadata confirming its authenticity, attached a signed statement about editing, changing the route, disconnecting communications, and the impossible movement of the rover. He called a spade, concealment. The story blew up the internet. Within a few hours, it was picked up by major media outlets. Scientists had to comment. Most dismissed it as an optical illusion, compression artifact, or yet another conspiracy. but some disagreed. Avi Loeb issued a statement: "We must investigate anomalies with the same rigor with which we investigate ordinary rocks. If we cannot explain this object, we must honestly admit it and act transparently." ESA hinted that it would reconfigure the Trace Gas Orbiter to photograph Jezero at maximum resolution, precisely targeting the coordinates of the anomaly, and publish the data without editing or delay. China quietly announced a mission to return soil from Mars, targeting Jezero Crater, not the delta or the lake bed, but the slope where the object was spotted. The choice was clearly not accidental. It became impossible to ignore the problem. NASA convened an emergency commission, officially to review data processing protocols, unofficially to decide what to do with the object on Mars that had not gone anywhere. There were three options. First, continue to deny it, pretend that there is nothing significant here, and allow foreign missions to investigate everything themselves, risking public exposure. Second, acknowledge the anomaly, but declare the area a restricted zone until further notice, citing planetary protection. Quarantine. Don't let anyone in until more data is available. Third, go all in. Send Perseverance back, this time with cameras on and live streaming. Let the whole world see humanity touch something unearthly for the first time. The debate was fierce. Lawyers feared precedents, scientists craved data, and the PR department expected a scandal either way. Then someone leaked a secret memo from the intelligence community. It reported that last month, 3 satellites in near-Earth orbit had malfunctioned under unexplained circumstances. Shortly before that, all 3 had been moved to observe the areas through which fragments of 3I Atlas were passing. After the failure, the satellites were found in other orbits, operating normally and unaware of the transition itself. The same thing that happened to Perseverance happened here. Someone or something moved the equipment and cleaned up the traces. This changed the tone of the discussion. If even Earth's orbit is compromised, if objects can be moved without permission, then the anomaly on Mars is not an isolated case, but part of a system. Networks with a large radius of action and their own rules. The memo ended with a single recommendation: do not approach the nodes. Do not attempt to extract them. Observe from a distance. Wait. Someone or something was watching us, gauging how ready we were. The shutdown of Perseverance was not an attack, but a warning, a restriction that is best not to violate. A failed test. Touch it, and you will be pushed away. Press harder. Who knows what will happen? NASA issued a cautious statement. Image 847 shows a natural mineral formation with unusual reflective properties. Perseverance will continue its mission as planned. Further exploration of this site is not scientifically justified. Translation: we're leaving. Privately, the rover's route was strictly fixed, prohibiting any deviations. New protocols were added to the command software. If the cameras ever detect a highly reflective geometric object again, the data will first go to a closed buffer, be checked, and, if necessary, edited or completely destroyed. Concealment was no longer spontaneous. It had become a system. Meanwhile, 3I Atlas continued to circle Jupiter, its fragments performing a slow dance, Europa's plumes pulsing with mathematical patterns. And on Mars, on the dusty slope of Jezero, something smooth and polished lay waiting for the day when humanity would be mature enough to approach it, asking for permission, rather than reaching out blindly like a child toward a hot stove. The retired planner who leaked the image received visitors. No threats, just questions and suggestions. They told him that his actions had been noticed at the very top, that there were people who agreed with him, that transparency was important, but time was more important. "Do you think we don't want to know?" one of them asked. "We desperately want to. But if we rush and start pushing without understanding the rules, we could set in motion processes that can no longer be stopped. It's better to observe, to learn, to wait for the moment." He asked when that moment would come. There was no answer. Years of simulations passed. Analysts ran through scenarios. What if there were more nodes? What if other rovers on other missions found similar artifacts? What if amateurs with large telescopes discovered anomalies in Earth's orbit? Each scenario ended the same way. Revealing too much truth too quickly would tear society apart. Stock market crashes, religious schisms, wars over access to alien technologies. The best strategy seemed to be gradual disclosure, a slow normalization of the strangeness, a gentle acclimation to the idea that the universe was never empty. By the time most people accepted the fact that we were not alone, the initial shock would be dulled and manageable, safe. But such a strategy required time. It assumed that the network would wait. But what if it didn't? What if 3i Atlas and its nodes were operating on a schedule that did not take Earth's readiness into account? What if the test was not only whether we could find the artifacts, but whether we could do so before anyone else? Because the nodes were not completely passive. Seismic activity, magnetometers, orbital disturbances, everything hinted at low-level but coordinated activity, as if the network was communicating and preparing. What for? No one knew. Theories ranged from harmless to catastrophic. Maybe they were beacons, markers for a future expedition that would arrive once the network was convinced that the locals were intelligent. Maybe the monitors were passive observers, collecting data on young species and reporting back to those who had launched them millennia ago. Or maybe they were security systems, planetary fuses designed to prevent dangerous civilizations from venturing beyond their worlds, waiting, assessing. If humanity fails the test, the nodes may activate, not for dialogue, but for containment or sterilization. They tried not to talk about it out loud, but behind closed doors, they played war games and wrote plans for the what-if scenario. What would Earth do if 3i Atlas or its fragments showed openly hostile intentions? Could we stop it? Did we still have time? Or had the timer started the moment Perseverance captured that very sparkle on Sol 847? Meanwhile, the rover continued to drive. It took cores, studied rocks, and faithfully performed its role as a mobile geo-laboratory. Every sol, its cameras scanned distant horizons. If another glint had flashed somewhere, the algorithms would have noted it and buried it. And somewhere in Jezero Crater, untouched, unexplored, and officially unrecognized, the polished rectangle glowed in the faint Martian sun. It waited. It just waited. It waited until the species that built the nuclear rovers became wise enough to ask permission before reaching out, or foolish enough to ignore the warning and touch it anyway. Either way, the network would respond, and humanity would finally learn the purpose for which 3i Atlas had been sent, to determine whether we deserved an invitation or quarantine.